Hey yo, folks, welcome to our narrative fireside chat. It's me again, Anuj. I'm here with Maynard. Maynard, would you like to introduce yourself, give a little bit of a brief introduction to what you do, and then we can go ahead and get into our questions.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Maynard Hearns. I am a writer and game designer, and in a past life, I was a public researcher. Now I make games for braver and kinder adults. I've had the great privilege of working on Spider-Man 2 with the team over at Insomniac Games, having a brief stint as an Imagineer over at Walt Disney Imagineering, and now I am a freelance game designer and writer, and also founding my own game studio with Sincere Interactive.
That's a very familiar name for me as well, as lead engineer on one of the projects of that.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get started with the questions. Our first question is, narrative design has a lot of meanings to a lot of people, ranging from writing dialogue and characters to advocating to the story and even level design. How would you describe what you do as a writers and narrative designers, um, especially since you kind of like also done directing as well?
Yeah, so in order to really describe what I do as a narrative designer, I've heard a bunch of different definitions in terms of like realistic day-to-day duties, in terms of like the spirit of what the position really looks like. But the way I like to think of it as it's your job to apply a story lens to game design. So one of the things I like to do with that, to describe that, is to have a foundational understanding of game design principles. What is a game versus a toy versus a piece of tech? While also having enough familiarity with relevant technical skills in order to implement stories as necessary, or at least to mock them up, say in prototyping, while truly knowing story very well. There's a whole like spectrum slash continuum of what constitutes narrative design versus game writing, from Barks to environmental storytelling to apocrypha to marketing to prototyping. I think if you ask me like what a narrative designer does, it's like, well, a narrative designer is a game designer whose job is like, but what does this mean for the story? And to deliver on that
Yeah.
question.
I know for us, especially as students, like at USC, one of the big things for our AGP, our capstone, was like the story is really important. So if a designer was like, I can put the story on the back burner, I was like, let's maybe not do
Hmm.
that one.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think we've talked about this privately, but narrative design, because no two games are going to look alike, you're going to find that the person responsible for narrative design is going to look different in from project to project. A great example, the team over at Journey, that game company, they don't have narrative designers. They have game designers, but those game designers know story. And the background that they lean on is very much like a visual art, storyboard-esque kind of visual art-centric background. Compare that to a game like Caves of Cud, which is highly combinatoric and like really is interested in like human crafted algorithmic generation in story. Their narrative designer is going to look a lot more like a systems designer. It's going to look a lot more like a under the hood sort of developer. And then you have games like, character action games as a genre, which really lean into some of the cinematic techniques in order to tell great stories.
Definitely. It's really one of those things of like, there's not really a one size fits all, especially with how big
Right,
teams can get. Um,
right.
because if you're the only narrative designer in a team of like 50 people, that's different than being the only narrative designer in a team of three people, where other people also care about the narrative, but are just officially doing something else, like programming or
Yeah.
production.
Yeah, and the burden looks different too, right? If you talk to a narrative designer in that team of 50 people where they're the only one, congratulations. Now it's your job to jockey the narrative cause across a team of 50. So you're
Mhm.
kind of like on behalf of the team and behalf of the director's vision and behalf of the narrative, you have to get your teammates to believe that what you're doing is important, speak their language about how what they're doing is relevant to story, and hopefully help you scaffold up the narrative in interesting ways. And it's definitely you are a team player first in that sort of environment. Team player, well, you're also a team player on the smaller team where you have a writer, you have a developer, you have an artist. Hopefully, you're doing a good job in that smaller circle, wearing many hats, where you're
Hmm.
kind of saying like, okay, what do we need production wise? What do we need engineering wise? What do we need level design wise? What can I do to help out there? Because the carousel of duties is definitely gonna not wait for you to jump on your favorite horse in order to go round and round.
You gotta just take what you can get sometimes. Oh
Yes,
man,
yes.
that's why like when the opportunity to write that dialogue system for Courier came up, I was like, "Hello, I'm here.
Yeah,
We don't
definitely.
need pixel
Definitely.
crushers. We can do this ourselves. It's fine."
Yeah,
And we did.
definitely.
By God, we did
Yeah,
not need that.
yeah.
Let's see. I think a subset of that question was since different companies require different skill sets for narrative designers, is there a right way to prepare for a career? Are there like wrong, also like kind of a corollary to that is like, are there wrong ways, like ways you might not necessarily
Mhm.
be helping yourself?
I think what's really helpful is knowing what you want to do as a narrative designer. If you're like, oh, I want to take care of the characters, or oh, I want to take care of like the scenes, or oh, I want to write for a level, those are useful skills. I mean, that's a useful idea to have. That way you can figure out what skills are relevant, right? If
Mhm.
you are joining a team that's making a procedurally generated simulator, you know, hand authoring a specific set piece is not going to be a very useful skill to them. On the flip side of the coin, it's not a very good idea to either box yourself into only being able to do one type of writing or to broaden yourself into a relevance, right? You do need to have a focus. You do need to have a specialty of yours that allows you to be able to meaningfully contribute to the team that you're asked to be joining on. Um, I mentioned you should have game design fundamentals, and I mentioned that you should have technical familiarities in addition to to a strong story foundation. I do fully believe in that three-leg bar stool kind of implementation. Learning how to work with tools like Twine and Yarn Spinner and Ink are great. I think if you are looking to really develop robust development skills, and by robust, I mean robust for narrative designers, there's nothing wrong with learning how to prototype simple mechanics.
Mhm.
How do you build a Rubik's Cube? How do you script an interaction in a 3D space? Right? Those will A, give you the knowledge and vocabulary to speak to your designers and developers in a way that's useful, but it'll also allow you to develop ideas that you may have on the job and be like, hey, can we do something like this? This is what I learned, this is what I tried, and this is what I got. So a high-level scripting language can be really useful. And having come from a literature and English background or literature and politics background at UC Santa Cruz, I can say that it can be really intimidating to try to pick up a programming language, especially if you're like me and past the age of 30. But it's another, I think one of the things I've learned from my experience with other designers and developers is that, it's another kind of vocabulary. It's another kind of syntax. It's another alphabet too, yes.
Mhm.
But being able to read well and to read clearly and to think through the construction of a script is something that's very useful for writing programming and something that you have been spending a lot of time on in your literature education, hopefully.
Definitely. I know that back at Merced for a little bit, I think our beginner to programming classes counted as as another language requirement. And I was
Hmm.
like, they kind of are because like once you know another language, you like sometimes when you're asking me to do a task, I'll like start thinking about it like, how would I do this in C sharp? Like, how do I translate this from this idea into an actionable item that we
Yeah,
can? And I think I agree with you in terms of like that also helps like speaking to engineers, like if an air designer is able to tell them I want X, Y, and Z exactly, um, and if they're honestly able to like come up with a basic idea of like how it could work even if it's not like the best solution, it still gets the engineer's brain that's thinking of like, oh, this is like these are the specifications that are wanted. Um,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
is very helpful because sometimes the hardest thing about programming is not knowing what you need to do and being like, is this correct? Is this
yeah.
right? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely clear parameters are everyone's best friend. Oh man.
I think, let's see, for our next question, I'm gonna move on past the kind of like, or I think we can talk about it. how difficult is it for narrative designers to apply to positions that require different skill sets? For example, if you have written dialogue experience but aren't necessarily familiar with coding in that language, and that is something that the job is asking for, how difficult would you say that is to kind of create that transferable knowledge?
So the I'm interpreting this question as being like, hey, I know Ruby on Rails, but I don't know C sharp. How much
Hmm.
trouble am I in?
Hmm.
My understanding is that if you have experience with a high-level scripting language and they ask you to be able to write in another high-level scripting language, you already have a leg up over someone who does not speak who cannot write in a high-level scripting language at all because you have the ability to go through documentation, you have the ability to look at examples, you have the ability to think through programming in a way that I think allows you to be like, okay, so it would look like this in C sharp. What would the documentation say I need to do for Lua?
Hmm.
And they're like, okay, great, now I know. Um, More generally, requiring different skill sets, this is the tough thing. You're going to acquire more skill sets if you get on game jams than if you were just cold applying to places where you don't have those skill sets. And you have to play the long game, right? It's a good idea, I think, for narrative designers and game writers to have a Unreal Blueprint certification. It's a good idea for game writers and narrative designers to have like a Unity visual scripting experience. Pick up enough to be able to uh, make a fool of yourself. Because that is more rewarding than not being able to not having confidence to pick it up at all, right?
Hmm.
Another thing I like to do is like, there's a difference between applying reflexively and applying proactively, or applying reactively versus applying proactively, right? So if you're like, oh, I want to work at, this amazing AAA studio as this position, I was like, huh, did they post a position for this, a listing for this position in the past? Can you find that anywhere online? What were the requirements for that position? Use that as the blueprint for your development, as your next
Hmm.
syllabi, right? So if you need to learn Maya in order to be a narrative designer, which at some of these big studios you do, you're going to find out because it's on the listing for a senior narrative designer there, or it's on the listing for a narrative designer there. And then you can be like, okay, how much is a Maya certification or the Maya software? Oh, wildly expensive. What about Blender?
Yeah.
So,
I look at mine and I'm like, oh, that is, I'm like, okay, it can't be that expensive. And that's like $2,000 a year. And I'm like, huh?
hmm
What do you mean
hmm
$2,000 a year?
Yes, yes. And but using those as templates for your development, I think are going to give you a lot of focus for what you're trying to learn. Yeah.
And like, it's something that's really important of just like find those older, because even if they're not necessarily 100% up to date,
hmm
they'll still like be pretty transferable. Like
Yeah,
more
and if
transferable.
someone go for it.
I was gonna say more transferable than like kind of throwing darts at a wall and seeing what skills work and what don't.
Exactly. You said what I was going to say anyway.
We're in sync.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things about like me liking technical narrative design was like, okay, I did not know that was a position I could apply for, but like
Yes.
I love implementing like narrative stuff. I love just talking with narrative designers. And so like let's start harnessing my skills for that, for good, question mark.
Yeah.
Let's go with good. Um, and a lot of the time, the biggest thing is like when companies take down those applications and don't replace them, and you're like, I was using that. That's unfortunate.
Yeah. So my one of the things I like to say is that, hey, I can't find this position for this thing. And I was like, well, because it's the internet and because, there are people of ill repute who save those uh listings and then post them on scam websites. The listings are there, but you don't have to apply to those scam websites. You can just control S to save the page, and now it's
Yeah.
yours. And now you have the blueprint. It's wild to like you have to be resourceful to be like, okay, this dude is using it for nefarious purposes. Can I redeem it and use it for my benefits in
I
that
never
way?
thought about that now. Just like, that's a very good point of just might as well use it since it's there, even if it is there. Like, use it and then I guess report it also just because
Yeah. Oh
like
my
you
God.
want
Yeah.
to,
100%. Why wouldn't you?
yeah, like report it and like maybe post like this is the requirements that were from the actual original company for
Yes.
those who need it.
Yeah. But these are also I mean, this is just one strategy, right? This is a great way to sort of like, if you're like, I just need to farm quick listings to see what my top companies look for in the position I want to apply to. And this is a great way to see what they got. Now, another great thing to do is to go on LinkedIn and see who there is currently in the seat you want to be in,
Mhm.
reach out to them, look at their LinkedIn profile. Have they won screenplay competitions? Have they been a freelancer? Did they write a novel? Did they like, how did they get in that chair? Say hi, but also see what they're putting up online for free and see like what you can do to kind of stack similar experience there.
That's a really good point that I hadn't thought about of just like look at the person that you want to be and then figure out how they got there. And then
Hmm.
it's the standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
It
Figure out
really
how they got
is.
there. And, depending on the studio, there may be more than one person in that position. Shop around, see who has the closest experience to yours, or see like if you can take something from all of their stuff and like try to build your own path there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Our next question would be, within what you are permitted to share, what are some projects that you have worked on or are working on, and what kind of work do you do for them? You mentioned Spider-Man 2 earlier, and
Yeah.
Sincere Interactive, a very familiar name for both of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, so when I was at Spider-Man, I was in a writer's room. I got every week I was meeting with writers, I was turning in scripts, I was working on barks. It was very classic like writing stuff. I actually had to ask permission I didn't have to ask permission, but I actually had to ask if there was any way I could actually get in Engine to see what the editor looked like because the writers just were doing other things. What was really good on top of that was being able to collaborate and talk to people across the departments there and see how they were involved in building out so many parts of the game that were really exciting. One of the things I really got to do that I was really proud of was working on the spider bots. And then partnering with a designer there, partnering with an artist there, seeing how we can make this work, and learning how to collaborate and what each department cared about gave me the freedom to communicate um, team wants and deliverables in a manner that that got people on board. I also worked on Try Again, which was an independent games
Yes.
nominee from 2023 over at IGF with GDC. And that was incredible. That was so much fun. While there, I got to work with Adam Marina, shout out, and the rest of the team there in order to develop um, the narrative there, and that was a lot of breaking story, figuring out the characters, figuring out which stories we could tell in each space, and that was a lot of fun. I got to partner with a lot of designers in the narrative lead there. Um, uh, and then now that I'm on Sincere Interactive, and now that I'm working on what was my baby, I'm kind of very much. It was very much like writing there. The narrative portions, I partnered with our lead writer there, Jack Gibba, and we sort of oh God, like we did so many drafts of the story. I think if you look on our writer duet file, we're on like draft 15 or something before
Yeah.
we locked it. And it's just because, you cook up the story and then like your colleagues cook up a level and you're like, we have to rewrite the story. So that like it's just like this iterative stew that really kind of just kept going and going. It was so much fun. I think another thing I got to do that I was really proud of at Insomniac, that I also got to do here at US on Sincere Interactive with our game Courier Dragons Within, is cast and uh, supervise VO sessions. I got to supervise with Sincere, but I was just attending at Insomniac, and that was so much fun. So writing lines that are meant to be read, working with actors, working with sound designers, working with dialogue editors, those or dialogue engineers. Those are a bunch of fun. A bunch of fun.
Shout out Jack.
Yeah.
I I definitely I think that especially with like a project like Courier that's kind of starting as this like student project and then expanding it, rewriting often becomes you rewrite more than you write. I think it's like what 90
Yeah.
I think I saw it saying like 90% of writing is rewriting, and even that
Yes.
seems like an understatement. I there are times where I'm just like, that was not what was there originally. I'm gonna go ahead and like make this change to how the game works.
Yeah.
Just be
Yeah.
like,
And
oh, whoops.
I think if you want to be a writer of any medium, and this is specifically for the narrative designers and the game writers, be prepared to have a good idea and then write it until it's not a good idea anymore. And then keep writing until it's a great idea.
That's a good point. Let's just keep
Yes,
rewriting.
keep
Also,
rewriting.
fun fact, I think Donuts had to try again space at USC. Because I saw on
Ah.
our like computers, I saw try again, and I was like, hey, hang on a minute, I know what that is.
Yep, 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 yep. Yeah, no, I mean it was a great time working with those dudes. It was a great time working in that space and I'm really glad that Donuts has been doing really well. I was actually just talking about with my friends yesterday because we were talking about our love of crazy taxi. And I was like, you guys have got to play Donuts. You guys have got to play Donuts.
Oh, what if there's a game
So
like that? Right now.
um yeah, no, I mean I actually think for narrative designers, that's the thing, especially if you want to be a narrative designer, you need to get real comfortable with rewriting. It's and it's because when we think about writing, especially those of us who love story, we think about the finished product and we think we're supposed to sit down and write the finished product. And then we realize that the difference between what we were taught in school, which is like, write a rough draft, and then write a second draft, and then write a third draft, your final draft, was timelines because they could only give us three drafts in school. In the real world, it is 14 drafts. It is however many until it's right. And you may say like you have a lot of ideas, or you may say I only have one idea. It's like that's fine as long as you're okay rewriting the same thing, you're gonna be fine.
That's a really good point of just like you kind of get timelines in like a work environment, but even then, like it's different than the timelines that we get like in school,
Yeah.
um, of just I have to write X amount. This
Hmm.
actually segues us very nicely into a question that I'm going to jump forward a little bit. Of what kind of education do you recommend that an aspiring narrative designer receive? Should they get a degree in English, game design, folks on internships? How can students who are interested in narrative design pump up their portfolio with a degree versus if they're in a degree, how can they take advantage of that to their full capacity?
So I'm gonna offer that the only utility of having a degree in game design is having 3 years working on games and meeting people who are also working on games.
Mhm.
If you're wondering what you should be majoring in, I'm going to tell you don't bother. You can, especially, but if you're in school and you're like, oh, I couldn't get into this class, call up the professor or write them an email or write the TA an email. Be like, hey, can I have the syllabus? They'll be happy to give it to you.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
the most important thing you can do is develop credits, get things under your belt. I don't know if you are like me, but I have a huge YouTube habit. It's a bad habit. Like if a YouTube video was a cigarette, I'd be underground. But you can tell from YouTubers their first video versus their 400th video, night and day. Always night and day because they can't help but get better because they kept doing it.
Mhm.
Um, they're more comfortable. They have their style. It's entertaining, which is rule number one. And if you can get on projects and produce things, if you can mod things, if you can prototype things, if you can, find a way to see if your professors or your teachers, if you're in high school, will accept a alternative turn-in that's a game for your assignment, that could really work in your favor. If you're wondering which degree I should go for, whichever one's going to give you the skills you need, that you feel like you would need a formal education but especially when it comes to your portfolio, especially when it comes to your um, to job hiring, you're going to want to show that you are capable of building things outside of the school environment.
Absolutely. I think being able to take advantage of like professors are pretty relaxed, all things considered.
Hmm.
Like they are a lot of them, especially if you're not in CS, they're very much there to teach. They're there to help you learn. And like if somebody expresses interest in their curriculum that isn't able to take it, that might even be
Hmm.
like, oh shoot, this is great. Somebody wants to learn this. Uh,
Yeah. And they may make an
and
exception for you. They may be like, oh, I can get another person in this room.
Yeah.
So,
I remember, I think I did an English minor at Merced because we didn't have any game design stuff there because we were uh, 14 years old. We just recently had freshmen who are younger than university for the first time, which is insane to me. But
I've seen Merced. I know what it looks
you,
like.
you've seen it, you understand.
Yeah.
But in those game classes, we had we had creative expression assignments, and I wrote games for those. I wrote uh, a story, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, but first person and with multiple endings. I think there were 8 endings in total. One of which
Hmm.
ends with basically you just don't go on the quest, and you're like, all right, I'm home. And
Ha.
Arthur dies, and it's like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
And I also wrote a story about Hamlet from Ophelia's perspective in the scenes where she's not there because she's not there in a few scenes and then she dies. Uh,
Hmm.
so like you want to hone those skills through those submissions and like that becomes a lot of like I think that analogy of like a YouTuber just they get better because they have to because it's just a part of working and like developing those skills. I think was a really poignant point, honestly.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, I'd like to ask on top of that, I believe we talked a little bit earlier about software. Um, what writing tools do you use personally, and how do they compare to what students might be familiar with? So things like Twine, Ink, Yarn Spinner. Um, and how important is it to learn those tools? I think you've definitely started in terms of like it's very important, but go a
Yeah.
little bit more into it.
Well, so what's really interesting is that on a portfolio level, if you can demonstrate that you can tell a story, that is more important than how many tools you know. And I'm speaking as someone who primarily writes. In terms of, which software is best, like if you were comfortable learning a software, that's fine. That's enough. Twine has its merits because it's a very low barrier to entry to start making like branching narratives. Those can work really well. Unreal Engine Blueprints is very popular right now because it allows people to be able to script behaviors, which, if you're like me, you're just like, oh, I want to make a scene where this happens, and this happens. That's a series of triggers that I can program, not needing to know how to program, just using the Unreal Blueprints interface there. I think the biggest mistake you can make is not knowing how to use any program. Final Draft is like an industry standard. I like using Writer Duet because it's cheaper and it gives me a similar result. And no one has told me upon receiving a PDF of a script written in Final Draft, I mean, in Writer Duet, that this was not a real script. So,
Oh
um,
man.
but I think you should learn how to do screenwriting. Even if you decide you're never going to write more than 3 pieces in that thing a year, fine. Learn how to write for the screen, though. It is an interactive medium, it is a visual medium. Also, learning how to write those same stories in Excel sheets is a good skill
Yes.
to learn because, you may be the person responsible for implementing that. Um, uh, Pick up a game engine. Twine is a game engine. Unity is a game engine. Let's see. RPG Maker is a game engine. Just get familiar with an editor. See if you can build a donut in Blender to show that those things don't scare you. The first time I downloaded Unity was in 2017. I opened Unity once a year for 6 years. And each time be like, there's a new Unity update, and then I downloaded it, and then I didn't touch it again.
Like the turning of the tide was like you learning about like you downloading a Unity version and
Yes.
then
I didn't even
moving
realize
on.
you didn't need to do that. It can be a steep barrier to entry, but Unity is also and there's other game engines too. There's Godot, there's I mentioned Unreal Engine. Those are the three I usually like play around with. But um the idea being that the if you can show that you can navigate those tools, you're going to do very well. You're more likely to do well in the application space or in the game jam space, simply because you're not unsure on your feet. And there is a learning curve. I think I got okay at Unity after about a year and a half of using it.
I am in agreement of just like honestly the best way to learn Unity is to just use it because I learned more
Mhm.
about Unity working on Courier in that 1 year than like the 6 years before that, where I was just kind of like, I can use Unity and then doing like one or two things in it and then putting it away.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. I
having
would
to,
say, sorry, go for it.
I was gonna say, having to use it helps you learn about it, and it has such a big community of like support. Bracky's my goat. Oh my God.
Yeah. Brackets is great. And also, I don't know why they didn't advertise this. There's a Unity manual. There's a Unity manual. If you look up Unity manual, there is a manual. Unreal also has a really robust documentation. Um, but the manual is a great way to not try to reinvent the wheel so many times, but you can use forums. I know that some people are using LLMs to help them step through problems, although I don't necessarily recommend that if you want to become proficient in it, just because it is a good idea to develop those sort of like critical thinking, problem solving skills. Um, yeah.
Definitely. For our next question, I am now realizing that jumping through this means that I don't exactly know where I am.
I
Um,
believe you, there's
let's see.
also how does gameplay affect how you create
Yes.
your experience or any other of these questions?
Let's go with let's go with the actually let's go with question number 9 of how do you include personal experiences in your writing and in your writing for games too.
Yeah, so I'm quite ambivalent with this. And the reason why I think this is because it's a, I think when you're starting out and you're really developing your confidence as a writer, it is a good idea to write what you know.
Mhm.
I think it is a really good idea to practice, going back into the archive of your experiences and trying to take some emotional truth from those moments and uh, putting them into the game space or putting them into the creative space. I do think it is also a writer's responsibility to practice what we call cognitive empathy, which is, if there's an opposite to cognitive empathy, it is affective empathy. And the way I like to think about affective empathy is affective empathy leans on memory, cognitive empathy leans on imagination. Affective empathy would say, oh, I know how this feels because I've been there too. Cognitive empathy is me going, I haven't been here, but let me sit with this and imagine what it must be like to live this way or to experience what these people are experiencing. How would this affect my relationships? How would this affect my outlook on life? What kind of person would I need to be in order to overcome these circumstances or push through these circumstances? What would success look like? It's a lot more intensive. It's a lot more cognitively intensive. When we talk about including personal experiences in writing, outside of games, there's a whole memoir of writing from your personal experience, and that's the memoir. That whole genre, and it's called a memoir. The When you are writing fiction, my hope is that you as a writer have the cognitive empathy to begin to develop characters that do not all think, look, and sound like people you know or maybe you're familiar with. Or you have the humility to go, I don't know how to write this character, and then go find out how. Whether that's finding people who might be like this character or exhibit traits like this character, or looking for examples of these characters in other pieces of writing outside of fiction, outside of traditional storytelling, because personal experiences, they're wonderful, but they're not infallible, and they're
Mhm.
not the holy grail. They're not sacred. They're sacred to us. They don't have to be sacred to the stories we're telling. Um, and if you were going to tell compelling stories about people like you or have gone through things like you have to be willing to figure out how you're going to communicate those experiences to people who are not like you, who may not have gone through what you're going through, especially if you're going to be joining a professional team.
Mhm. I think like the professional team comment is like, yeah, that is, and if you're going to talk to like, especially at a higher level, if you're going to talk to the money people, then it's like, how do you communicate this to people who might not, who probably like don't necessarily practice that cognitive empathy.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really important because that's how things get funded. We talked a little bit in the production panel about just like funding is just a big thing. Like we
Yeah.
that's just how things are. Let's see.
Yeah.
I think that segues us quite well into the question that I think um, question 11, which is how do you write to perspectives or cultures that you haven't experienced firsthand? Um, how would that
Yeah.
go?
So what's great is that in the great big world of the ecosystem of games, there are wonderful studios and organizations whose whole thing is just providing cultural competency, providing cultural consultants or competency consultants, and they're so wonderfully helpful for helping identify the gaps in our understanding, right? Imagination is a practice, just like everything else. And we're not going to get it right all the time. And it's out of a sense of wanting to produce and preserve dignity for a group that we may not be a part of. It is a good idea to solicit the input of representatives of that group. And
Mhm.
remember, like, no group is a monolith. We can imagine there are people who represent the exact opposite of what we're trying to produce on the screen, in that same demographic. But if I were to describe what a writer's job is, a writer is supposed to be part psychologist, part comedian, part, you know, I don't know, world builder, and part journalist. It's your job to figure out what your beat is and then learn everything you can about that beat, and you don't get to skip it. If you do, your work's not going to be very good. And if there's anything that an audience is good at, it's smelling bullshit. Um,
That's a good
so.
point.
So don't be ashamed of over researching. Don't be ashamed of being like, I don't know what this means and I don't know how to fix this, but I'm gonna figure it out. Um, that may mean that you join other groups and be like, hey, I'd love to ask a couple of questions. I'm working on a project. I'd love to hear your perspective on this thing. What's also great is that if you talk to other writers, they're also going to be, chances are, if you're joining a good mid-sized one or a larger one, especially in the games industry, there's going to be people of different identities than you, different cultural backgrounds than you, and they will be able to provide some insights or find answers for you. One of the great things I learned from writing is that very little of it, especially in writing for games, very little of it is actually sitting on a hill in your tower by yourself, producing a wonderful masterpiece that everyone will have no ch choice but to accept. So much of it is about soliciting feedback from the players, from developers, from superiors, and like figuring out which version produces the most honor for each group.
That's a very good, like, that's a very good point of just sometimes just talk to people. They want to, like, I like talking about Indian culture. Like, I think it's fun, especially like Indian American culture. It's like
Hmm.
I like talking about this. If you ask me about it, and I'll talk to you about it. Um, and this industry does have like a lot, like people of all different stripes and folks. You just go to GDC and it's like very diverse in like the best possible ways. I always love GDC is always like one of my favorite times of year because I'm like, oh my
Hmm.
God, I don't have to explain what game design isn't art to a group of people.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, yeah, man.
Let's see. I think we have a couple more questions we can ask before we go into audience questions. For our next question, I would like to let's see. Let me. There we go. I'm keeping an eye um, on our chat just to make sure that I'm getting everything. But let's see. How about how do you ensure that a character that you're writing's voice is distinct from other characters? And do you think that that's something that's important to strive for? Um,
Yeah. Okay, so it's I'm reminded of a couple of really great writers. David Mamet, who is a playwright. He wrote the play Oleana, very famous. And I'm reminded of David Mitchell, who wrote Cloud Atlas.
mhm.
And that is also a book that was turned into a movie by the Wachowski sisters. But it was a book that, when I read it, was just rich with so many different speech. patterns and speech registers. No two characters sounded alike in that. I think when it comes to, you know, writing characters that are distinct on the vocal level, like on the level of what they say, it is important to listen to the people around you. And I think in the age of the internet, I mean specifically go outside and try to keep your ears open. To maybe if you live in an area where there's a shopping mall or a promenade or any place where people are moderately busy and they can just talk and just like listen to them as they like walk by. That's still free. Um, the other thing I would say is that, speech is such an it's so contextual and it's such an evidence of psychology and, ethical frameworks and, perceived threat levels that it's it's a good idea to maybe, if you have the spoons for it, role play to think about, okay, how would this person think in this situation? What is their goal? What do they care about? Maybe you want to take an improv class, maybe you want to take a beginning acting class. Really try to embody the characters. That's gonna be really good. And you'll find that if you're leaning on stereotypes, which aren't bad, just incomplete representations, it just means you have a little bit more work to do if you want to do that kind of work at all, right? Flat
Mhm.
characters do exist. Um, the when I find that I am writing characters who I need them to sound different from each other, I'll take into account their educational level, I'll take into account their hobbies, I'll take into account what they know and what metaphors they'll use, right? So if you're talking to a uh a guy who likes to work on cars, mechanic, real salt of the earth dude, got his high school education, never went to college, and he's fixing a car, and his daughter comes up to him, and she's having a problem with school. He's probably going to use language that is, or a metaphor that is based on his knowledge around fixing cars to describe working through a problem,
Mhm.
as opposed to like this erudite psychologist, as opposed to a politician, as opposed to a pastor, right? Like there's so many different ways for people to express themselves, but these people are expressing themselves. So the speech is going to be reflective of their um their knowledge sets.
Definitely. And I feel like being on a college campus is another great place you can just like go to the library and sit and just like people listen, for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
This is like you are in no better position to be doing that than a university. It's a
Yeah.
really good way to learn. And I
Interview
know,
your parents. Talk to
yeah.
kids.
Oh yeah, kids. As somebody whose mom teaches second graders, they say some things that you're like, what?
Yeah, they're so
I
smart. They're so
yeah,
smart.
they have said some things that I'm like, okay, I need to reframe like my brain a little bit after what you just said. What happened?
Exactly. They keep you young. What can I
hmm
say?
And also
Very
just
nice.
I think I was talking to Roosevelt and he's used the phrase a bus driver's vacation. I was like, I have never
Mm.
heard that phrase before. And it's like
Oh my
a bus driver's vacation, they're just still gonna be driving on their vacation. So they're still doing what they do. He used it in the context of him using Unity while he was on break over summer. And I was
oh
like,
my goodness.
I'm gonna have to steal that one. That one's good.
That is a great one. That's so great. That's so great.
I think right now we're coming up on the end, so we can start going towards audience questions. And if we have time, we can circle back to question. And some of these audience questions are ones that are similar to what we have. So, as an example,
Sure.
or Megna asked the question, how do you showcase your writing in your portfolio in a way that's concise, and in a way that
Hmm.
can, because people like I've heard at least a lot from recruiters, like recruiters are looking at your resume and portfolio for like a minute at most,
Yeah.
if that.
Yeah. So I think if you're when it comes to like showcasing your writing, try to make it so it's no more than 3 to 5 clicks away. Five is pushing it from your landing page. Like show them where they can like immediately get to your writing and immediately start looking through your samples, right? Because um, how you showcase your writing is just as important at an early stage in your career as like, anything else and trying to be focused in what you are showing to whom. So you may want a separate design portfolio from your writing portfolio if you're doing both of those things, right? Because if you submit a design portfolio for a writing position and they're like, "Where's the writing?" They're not going to spend. They're not. You won't get to those 3 to 5 clicks. right? But if you're showcasing a writing portfolio for a design position, they're gonna be like, where are the designs? And you will not get those 3 to 5 clicks that way. I mean, I am warming up to the idea of using Notion as your portfolio website so that, it's free. You can publish as many of those as you need and then just have it there. Yeah, try to keep it so that you can get the goods in front of their face as fast as possible.
UI and minimizing the amount of clicks. Uh,
Yeah.
there are there are apps that I'm like, are we sure that are we sure that UI person okayed this? Because this is not fair. I LinkedIn is one of those, unfortunately. That
Yeah.
that let's see. For a second question, we have how do you go about creating stories and writing in the face of like potentially people who might push back or people who might um like have issues with it. Like the
Yeah.
context of being like today's political climate of just oh the
Yeah.
horrors. Um,
So this is something I've been really mulling with a lot. And I've definitely been talking with my mentors about it too. And the thing about it is that, people want a good story
mhm,
and they want to feel like they're being respected with their time. And they often don't want to feel like they're being lectured to or being made to feel ashamed of themselves. If you are making something that is that you worry is going to produce those effects in others, I would say like, okay, well, is that your audience? Are those the people that you want your work to be consumed by? If you're like, no, then it's like, okay, then don't. Who cares what they think?
mhm,
And I understand, like, that can constitute a level of bravery in today's climate. But unfortunately, as an artist, you left safe harbor 20 leagues ago. You're kind of just out there. These times are really interesting and exciting because there's no version of being an artist where, in my mind, being a successful and a courageous artist where you are allowed to be afraid of your audience. Criticism's going to happen. If you're too afraid of criticism to make stuff, you need to be less afraid of criticism.
mhm,
Um, because I think what's most likely to happen for a lot of people is that, they think, oh, I'm going to make this and people are going to like, lash out at me and like, no, that might happen. Um, and then what? And then what? Likely on it's going to blow over especially if you don't feed the fires. And you're going to be able to, have that credit under your belt and people are going to hire you because you have a credit under your belt.
mhm.
Or, people are going to love what you made. Your community will find you and they're going to be like, I need more of this, please. And you're going to get hopefully you'll get an opportunity to do that, or you'll at least have like the wind behind you to kind of keep making that stuff. Or, and this is also a very real possibility, no one notices. No one notices.
Right.
And I would say, actually, for a lot of very famous writers, the first book it doesn't make that big of a splash. The second book does a little bit better. The fourth or fifth book sometimes is the one that really catches fire, and then they read all of your other work. And then so like your fifth book might be the best thing for your first book. So if I mean, the audience artist relationship has been one that's been in tension the entire time. Um, and remember, you're not doing this by yourself. Games are not made in a vacuum. You get to have your teammates back and they get to have yours. And if you guys trust each other and you're just like, we all believe in this vision, even if like the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune sort of come down on you, you're not facing them alone. Your friends are going to look after you. They're going to uh, protect you. And if nothing else, they'll have their resources to sort of be like, hey, check this out, or hey, no news today. And that's gonna be really good. You're part of a crew there. That's what I've been using to get me through this. So,
This industry is like one of the things that I love about it is that like everybody likes each other. Like
mhm.
GD's like it's so easy for me to just sit down and talk to a game dev and just like have a fun conversation about like about just games and just this if there is any industry where people are going to willing to kind of step out and help you, it's going to be this one, especially coming from the Bay Area where Oh, it's not like that back home.
Yeah.
It's such a, it's such like a different reality. Or it's reach out to people. It's
Hmm.
we're in this together. People want to help other people, I think. And
Yeah.
it can be hard to internalize that, especially if you look at everything. But like people, especially in games, will want to just help you out. Especially people who are in the industry already. Like they want to see other people like you. They
Yeah.
want to see people succeed.
Yeah. And there's just a great quote that I saw on Instagram the other day that says, fear is a mile wide and an inch deep.
Hmm.
Like, the second you start doing it, the second you commit, you're gonna see there was really nothing to be so worried about. 9 times out of 10. It's like, Maynard, what about that 10th time? And I'll be like, swim! So
Do your best. I don't know.
swim. You're gonna find that like at some point being afraid is gonna stop being useful to your body, and then you're just gonna focus on getting through it, and then you're gonna be
Yeah.
like, oh, I got through it, and then the fear just kind of died on the way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. I think with that, we're coming up on time. Thank you so much for coming by and
Indeed.
speaking with us, Maynard. This was super good, super cool.
Yeah.
We, I'm best of luck with your future endeavors. Is there anybody that you'd like to kind of shout out and say thank you to as we wrap up for the day?
Yeah. USC Games, fight on. Shout out to you
Woo!
guys. Shout out to my team at Sincere Interactive. The game that we're building is due out this Labor Day, and we're all working hard on it. Shout out to my mentors, Adam Miller, Adam Marina, Belinda Garcia, Aaron Aberhart. I have a dozen. There's lots of people. Games are not made alone. A career is not made alone. It's really useful to sort of cultivate your network over time, like you would cultivate a garden. Yeah, I mean, too many people. That list is a mile long. My parents, hi. Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. Up next, we have our talk from the Wear Cleaner on professionalism and student teams. Um, and yeah, it's a USC day today for
it is.
SGDA.
It is. Fight
We'll
on.
see
All
you guys.
right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.